Hi, team. Welcome to 10 Talks. Today's conversation is something that all of us can either relate to personally, or we have a friend who manages this. We're talking about perfectionism, how to live with it, what is it, where does it come from, and very grateful for our teammate, Mark, who's going to really just kind of tell us the science behind it, and let's have a conversation about it. So, Mark, what do we need to know about perfectionism?
Well, good evening, good morning, whenever you're watching this podcast. Perfectionism in sport, but elite sport, but also in business, it can have some positive benefits to it. I mean, if you think about it, when someone's incredibly motivated and they put a lot of time and effort into their craft, you can be quite productive. The challenge is when you get stuck, and when that kind of over conscientiousness really becomes a wall and becomes a barrier to what we call like functional impairment in relationships and in work, and really just how it can affect other people. The way I like to think about perfectionism is that kind of splitting it out. We can talk more clinical. A lot of times people will throw around the term OCD. Like, I'm really OCD about this, almost like using it as a verb. Whereas OCD and OCPD, or the personality disorder, really the quirks that come from someone who is overly perfectionistic, are very different. So I think we talked about that. That might be help kind of clarify.
Yeah, great place to start.
And I'd love to think if someone who's watching this might have some of these terms resonate with them. Great. So let's first talk about OCPD. So, are you, as you're listening to this, someone who is kind of has, these are the symptoms, acts restrained or restricted with your emotions? You're adherent to rules, but in a very inflexible and rigid way. You create order and lists for tasks. Okay, I'm not talking about just making a list of things you need to go to the grocery store and buy. I'm talking about for everything. You desire to control your relationships with others, and then they feel that control. Mm-hmm. You have difficulty empathizing with other people and or maintaining intimate relationships. You have extreme dedication to your work, keeping you up late in hours and impacting your sleep. You have a need for perfection even in the smallest detail, stuff that would otherwise be meaningless. You have problems with identity and or self-direction. You have trouble giving up control and or delegating tasks. If any of that sounds like you might be struggling with a little bit of obsessive compulsive personality disorder traits. The deal is you don't get the diagnosis unless it actually is impacting areas of your life where it's, the excessive devotion to work or sport is at the expense of family or friends, or that you're really not able to delegate, or you're getting preoccupied with the minutia or the process. In a sport landscape, you could think about this, that you're never able to get out of a practice mindset versus actually performance. So I'll pause there.
Well, Mark, what's really interesting about that is I'm sure anybody listening could be like, well, I've had some time with that. Yeah, like, oh, that sounds a little like me. Like, I can see where I'm doing that. How do we know when it's different? You said that it's impacting you. Well, I can think about the stories that go with, well, yeah, I'm obsessed with work, but look at all the success I'm doing for the family. Look what I'm giving everybody. We can wrap it in a story that turns it into, I don't want to say justification, but gives their reason to be like, don't make me change because look at the good result I'm getting, versus me having to maybe be more into my relationships or go into a space that I don't feel as comfortable with.
Well, so you nailed it. Folks that struggle with OCPD, or those that have that rigid focus on detail, don't actually, it doesn't register with them that there's a problem. Mm-hmm. Now, the folks that have true OCD, like the clinical diagnosis of OCD, we have intrusive thoughts, and then you have these compulsive behaviors that occur to get rid of that distress you feel from those intrusive thoughts. They have insight. They know that what's occurring is problematic, and they don't want to be stuck with these intrusive thoughts, much less participate in the compulsive behaviors. They want to get rid of it. If you have OCPD and you feel compelled to make a list of items and or you have to do things in a certain order, otherwise you feel lots of distress, but you don't understand how anybody else wouldn't otherwise get this.
Yeah.
And that's someone who it's really stuck with their personality traits and quirks. And those people actually need to be sort of told by the people that love them and their colleagues and their teammates that, hey, maybe what you're doing is really impacting other people. And so basically you need to have that external brain to help you. So trusting your loved ones really to always give you feedback. That's been a recurring theme in this.
That is a winning strategy, as long as your loved ones are really for you and really understanding. Mark, what's really interesting about this is when I watch film and kind of think about my clients and the people that struggle with this, it's going to be a tough challenge to have them admit it, or because it's like, no, this is who I am. So you need to really accept me for who I am, because, the team just isn't, if everybody would just do what I'm doing, the team would be successful. Everything is more around getting everybody in system with them, rather than considering that we may want to get them out of system.
Yeah, exactly. If you think about it, someone who's a perfectionist has a fear of failure, and that they feel that they don't do things the certain way that they know how to do things, because you don't know what you don't know, that they're not going to be able to perform and to get the desired result. So by nature, a perfectionist is a results oriented person or athlete or whatever, which is truly the opposite of what that usually creates that spontaneous flow that can come when you're doing your best performance. That's when you're thinking about the process. It's as if you practice in a certain way, trust that you did it that way when you get to the field, and leave that behind and just trust your body to do its job. Just as when you're at work, you're not thinking about the actual way you type. You just trust that you already knew how to type, and then you get it just flows right through you. Just as when you're in the batter's box and you're thinking about taking a pitch, you're not actually thinking about the mechanics behind swinging the bat. You just trust that your body knows what it's doing. You don't let your brain impact that, which would otherwise be an automatic movement. So a little bit of a bleed into what we talked about last time with performance anxiety and the yips. Perfectionism, it's there's that stuckness that it comes with feeling like you have to do it a certain way.
So with that stuckness comes fear of failure and fear of being exposed and vulnerability. And sometimes a mechanism for managing fear can be anger. So I can react by being angry at you for even pointing something out like that, or angry at you of accusing me that my way isn't the best way. So I can go into anger, I can go into denial, I can go into quitting and going someplace else. How do we really set a person up to receive this information in a way that's for them and have the courage to do something with it? I mean, that takes a lot. When I'm thinking about listening to you and hearing and imagining the people that I know that wrestle with this, they believe that they need to be this way to be their true self. So coming in and challenging their identity is a bigger challenge than getting me to hit a baseball or getting me to do something. You're going to the core of who I am.
You're exactly right. I mean, if you think about it, their identity is so wrapped up in being this elite athlete because they put so much time and blood and sweat and tears into getting there, and they don't want to lose that part of themselves, which is why transitions in sport, out of sport, dealing with injury, again, it's all kind of comes back to that core of the athlete identity. Incorporating flexibility into their schedule and structure, and actually taking more of a team approach, not identifying the individual themselves. And say you're the coach, you want to be telling everyone this information rather than targeting one person.
Sure.
Because they're going to receive the information so much better. But again, the takeaways really are process versus results orientation when doing tasks. And it's okay to be very dedicated to a certain training regime, but knowing that if you get overly dedicated, you're at risk for developing all kinds of physical issues, including you're more prone to injury
Yes.
But like overtraining syndrome is an outgrowth of someone who's a perfectionist with their training regime and not listening to their body cues when, oh, we got a little bit of a twinge in my knee. Maybe I should back it off. Someone who's overly stuck on, being exercise dependent, they'll continue to go despite that.
Yeah.
And eating disorders the same way.
So, Mark, as a sports psychiatrist,
Mhm.
what's going on in our brains? All of this can sound good. I can have the best of intentions and I'm going to practice some flexibility. I again think of the clients that I have, and that gives them so much anxiety when the change is introduced and that they need to actually do something different than what they do. Just the implosion of the anxiety. And then they're trying to manage the anxiety. So it takes them back to that rigidness of just get everything in these boxes that I'm comfortable with, and trying to manage, the whole staff or the whole team to just get in these boxes because I need it to be this way. What's going on in the brain, and how do you help from a medication standpoint or a training perspective as a doctor?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So let's look at the two categories here, because perfectionism is one thing, but it's sort of like a symptom of like OCD versus OCPD. The two are quite different, but also very similar. In fact, there's a lot of comorbidity, like 20-30% of folks that have OCD also have the personality traits that come with being a very rigid individual. Someone who has OCD, it's a mental illness that with these intrusive thoughts and compulsive behaviors that can affect them, and it really, really devotes a ton of time and impacts all areas of their life. Those folks can benefit from their few styles of therapy. There's a three-prong approach. Whenever I meet someone who's actually struggling with OCD, and this is not just the compulsive counters. I'm talking about folks who have contamination fears of hand washing. Numbers are big, having to do things in certain orders, but it's a lot of irrational beliefs, and they're like, wow, I have no idea why I feel this one thought comes on and why I have to do this other behavior to get rid of it. But that's the only thing that I know that actually eliminates it. So what you do is you do graded exposure therapy, something called ERP, exposure response prevention. That's the gold standard treatment for OCD. That's when you work with a therapist and you have a fear ladder, and each rung in the ladder is a gradually more terrifying fear that you're trying to overcome. And by doing that gradual method, you eventually gain mastery over those fears and you become less anxious. So the same kind of work is done with generalized anxiety, but specifically with OCD, you do like in vivo work. Someone who has contamination fears, it may be being in the same room as something that scares them, like a dirty desk, and then eventually looking at the desk, and then imagining the desk, then looking at the desk, and then touching the desk, and then sitting with it. I remember there was one client that I had worked with who had done some a very effective flooding work where they actually had to get had to stand inside of a trash can. Mind you, they did not do that immediately. Right. They had gotten to the point where finally, like, well, yeah, now I can take out the trash. Before it was entirely too upsetting. So there's exposure work is one of the three prongs. Two is actually really good cognitive behavioral work where you are taught ways to combat those irrational thoughts that come to your mind, reframe it in a positive light, and then process it. That's what you can do with a very experienced therapist. And then finally, for those that are stuck, OCD can be incredibly biological. And so using serotonin-based medications, like preventative medications that treat anxiety and mood, even at higher doses, because it sometimes requires that. This is like the Prozacs and the sertralines of the world, or like Zoloft. You can use that in conjunction with the therapies. You typically would always want to do the therapy first and use the medication as a backup. So if you think about it this way, using the medication allows you to take a deeper dive in therapy so that it actually works well.
Yeah.
So that's OCD.
Okay.
OCPD is because it's such an ingrained, inflexible, rigid set of behaviors where the person's not actually aware that it's problematic and they're having to be given that feedback. That's when you're doing more flexibility work in therapy, where a lot of times these people don't actually seek out help. Right. The help is brought to them. Yes. And they're like, hey, you really do need to go talk with someone. And then gradually over time, you do some cognitive behavioral work to work on incorporating that flexibility. A lot of times, though, the folks that have that set of symptoms have a co-occurring issue that's arisen. Like I kind of alluded to that earlier, when like an athlete may have developed an injury from overtraining or disordered eating that may have arisen, where it's tangible evidence that what they're dealing with is problematic.
And what about perfectionism?
So coaches love perfectionism in their athletes because they're the ones that actually follow the rules, right? It's a hard one because you had to delicate balance between demanding excellence, but then also saying turn it off in practice or after practice, and then in the games allow yourself to be and allow greatness to kind of exude through you. If you put in the work, good stuff will happen, essentially. But yeah, that's how I would say it.
Boy, it just comes back to, again, everything that we're learning on every one of our conversations is trust the process, have a great support system to really be able to receive authentic feedback, and challenge yourself to be courageous enough to ask yourself, like, is this working for me? I mean, I think about any of the perfectionism and the eating disorders, all the many things that we've talked about. It's an internal battle that I'm wrestling with, right? Like I don't feel free to emotionally be engaged or have fun or joy or light because I'm managing so many things. And that in itself would be the gift I would love for our team and anyone listening, to be able to discover the joy of competing, the joy of relationships, the joy of life, versus the anxiety of constantly trying to control every single aspect of it.
Yeah, because you simply can't, right? If you're stuck on trying to control everything, then you're just spinning your wheels, and you'll never really move forward. You'll be stuck in place.
Well, what a gift to challenge ourselves, to have the courage to forward focus and to have everything be, again, a statement we use a lot: control the controllables and really trust the process with the rest of it. So, okay, team, this is a tough one. This is a truth in terms of really owning what we're wrestling with. Are we trying to control things that are uncontrollable? And are we on the team of people, or a coach and a therapist, that we can trust the process? And I would say that's the first step, is really finding your right team so that you can engage with people and practice something new to get a different result. So Mark, thank you so much, as always. Love you being on our team and the conversations. And here we go. It's a challenge to add some flexibility to our life.
Absolutely. Thanks, Carlette.
Thank you, team. Go out and practice, really owning who you are and finding the best version of you. To be continued.